Welcome to Inside American Politics by Skoob, the podcast where we dive deep into the mysteries that captivate our nation. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're exploring one of the most chilling and politically charged cases of recent American history, the D.C. pipe bomber who terrorized the nation's capital on the eve of January 6th. After 4 long years of investigation, the FBI finally cracked this case wide open, revealing a story that goes far beyond simple explosives and into the dark heart of political radicalization in modern America. Picture this. It's January 5th, 2021. Washington, D.C. is already a powder keg of political tension. The country has just wrapped up one of the most divisive presidential elections in modern history, and tomorrow, January 6th, Congress will meet to certify those results. But as darkness falls over the Capitol, someone is moving through the shadows with deadly intent, placing 2 carefully constructed pipe bombs that could have changed the course of American history forever. Let me take you back to that cold January evening in 2021. The United States was already fracturing along political lines. Social media was buzzing with conspiracy theories, allegations of election fraud were dominating news cycles, and millions of Americans were questioning the very foundations of their democracy. Into this volatile mix stepped an individual we now know as Brian Cole Jr., carrying a backpack filled with instruments of terror. Cole didn't choose his targets randomly. He selected the headquarters of both major political parties, the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee. Think about the symbolism here. These weren't just office buildings. They were the beating hearts of American political infrastructure. The RNC and DNC represent the organizational backbone of our 2-party system, the nerve centers where political strategy is born and democratic participation is coordinated. But here's what makes this story even more chilling. Cole placed these bombs on January 5th, knowing full well what was planned for the next day. January 6th was already shaping up to be a historically significant date. Congress was set to perform what's usually a routine constitutional duty, certifying the results of the presidential election. But nothing about January 6, 2021 would be routine. As Cole moved through the streets of D.C. that evening, surveillance cameras captured glimpses of a figure in dark clothing, face partially obscured, methodically placing explosive devices. The bombs themselves were sophisticated, not crude amateur constructions, but carefully engineered weapons designed to kill and maim. Each device contained components that investigators would later trace through credit card purchases, online orders, and delivery records. The placement was strategic. Near Folger Park, just blocks from the political headquarters, these devices sat like ticking time bombs in the heart of American democracy. Had they exploded, the carnage would have been immediate and devastating. But beyond the physical damage, imagine the psychological impact. On the same day that the Capitol was under siege, explosive devices detonating at party headquarters would have sent a message that nowhere in political Washington was safe. Fortunately, that nightmare scenario never materialized. But for hours, these weapons sat undetected in one of the most secured areas of the nation's capital, a stark reminder of how vulnerable our democratic institutions can be when faced with determined domestic terrorists. When the sun rose on January 6, 2021, Washington, D.C. was already bracing for chaos. Thousands of protesters were converging on the Capitol, many believing they were coming to save American democracy from what they perceived as a stolen election. The atmosphere was electric with tension, anger, and a sense that history was about to be made. But as lawmakers prepared for what should have been a ceremonial vote count, bomb detection units were making a discovery that would add an entirely new dimension of terror to an already unprecedented day. The pipe bombs that Cole had planted the night before were found before they could detonate, a stroke of luck that likely saved lives and prevented an already chaotic day from descending into absolute catastrophe. Picture the scene. While rioters were breaching the Capitol building, forcing lawmakers to flee for their lives, bomb squads were carefully working to disarm sophisticated explosive devices just blocks away. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was calculated. Cole had orchestrated his attack to coincide with maximum chaos, when law enforcement resources would be stretched thin, and the potential for his weapons to cause maximum psychological and political damage would be at its peak. The bomb's discovery added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Emergency responders had to divide their attention between the unfolding riot at the Capitol and the very real threat of explosive devices in nearby political centers. Streets were cordoned off, buildings were evacuated, and bomb technicians worked with painstaking precision to render the devices safe. Think about the ripple effects this could have had. If those bombs had exploded while the Capitol was under siege, it would have suggested a coordinated, multi-pronged attack on American democracy itself. The message would have been clear. Nowhere in political Washington was safe. The psychological impact on lawmakers, staff, and the American people would have been immeasurable. But there's another crucial element to consider here. The discovery of these bombs on January 6th meant that while the world's attention was focused on the dramatic scenes of the Capitol riot, a quieter but equally important investigation was beginning. As rioters were being arrested and the immediate crisis was contained, FBI agents were beginning the painstaking work of tracking down who had come so close to turning a day of political chaos into a day of mass casualties. In the days following January 6th, while the nation grappled with the images of the Capitol under siege, federal investigators were quietly launching one of the most complex domestic terrorism investigations in recent memory. The FBI understood immediately that they were dealing with someone who had the capability, intent, and patience to carry out sophisticated attacks on American political institutions. The investigation began with what they had: surveillance footage showing a partially obscured figure, 2 sophisticated explosive devices, and a crime scene that spanned multiple blocks in downtown Washington. But in the digital age, every criminal leaves electronic breadcrumbs, and Cole had left plenty. Investigators started with the bombs themselves. These weren't crude devices thrown together by an amateur. They were carefully constructed weapons that required specific components, tools, and knowledge. Each part had to be purchased somewhere, and in our interconnected economy, every purchase leaves a trail. Credit card transactions, online orders, shipping records, store surveillance footage. The FBI began the methodical work of tracing every possible component back to its source. Cell phone data became crucial. In a city like Washington, D.C., cell towers are constantly pinging phones, creating a digital map of where devices, and their owners, have been. Investigators could trace phones that had been in the area where the bombs were placed, cross-referencing that data with the timing of the placements and other evidence. License plate readers, those unobtrusive cameras mounted on street corners and police vehicles, provided another piece of the puzzle. Every vehicle that passed through the area was photographed and logged, creating a database of potential suspects and corroborating evidence. But perhaps most importantly, investigators began diving into the online world where Cole's radicalization had taken place. They monitored forums where election conspiracy theories flourished, tracked social media posts expressing violent intent, and analyzed the digital ecosystems where anger was transformed into action. The FBI also recognized that this case was too important to rely solely on digital forensics. They launched a public appeal, eventually offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the bomber's arrest. This strategy paid dividends, as tips began pouring in from concerned citizens who had noticed suspicious behavior, unusual purchases, or online activity that seemed relevant to the case. Each tip was carefully evaluated and cross-referenced with the growing mountain of digital evidence. False leads were quickly eliminated, but corroborating information was carefully logged and analyzed. The investigation was becoming a massive data correlation project, connecting dots across multiple platforms, databases, and sources of information. As weeks turned to months, the FBI's investigation into the D.C. pipe bomber was quietly building momentum. While public attention moved on to other stories, federal agents were working around the clock, following leads that were gradually pointing toward one individual, Brian Cole, Jr. The breakthrough came from combining multiple streams of evidence. Cole's credit card records showed purchases of components that exactly matched the materials found in the unexploded bombs. But it wasn't just one purchase. It was a pattern of acquisitions over time, suggesting premeditation and planning. Investigators could trace his digital footprint as he researched bomb-making techniques, purchased materials, and prepared for his attack. Phone records revealed something particularly telling. Cole had reset his phones hundreds of times over several years. Now, there could be innocent explanations for this behavior, but in the context of a domestic terrorism investigation, it suggested someone who was acutely aware of digital surveillance and was actively trying to avoid detection. Location data was equally damning. Cole's phone had pinged cell towers near the RNC and DNC headquarters, at times consistent with the bomb placements. License plate readers had captured his vehicle in the area. Surveillance footage, when enhanced and analyzed by experts, showed movements and clothing that matched other evidence linking Cole to the scene. But investigators weren't just building a case about what Cole did. They were also piecing together why he did it. His online activity revealed deep engagement with election conspiracy theories. He had consumed content claiming the 2020 election was stolen, and his digital behavior showed increasing radicalization over time. What's particularly significant about Cole's case is how it illustrates the modern path to domestic terrorism. He wasn't recruited by an organized group or trained in a compound somewhere. He was radicalized in his own home, through his own computer screen, consuming content that transformed his political frustrations into violent intent. The FBI's investigation revealed purchases not just of bomb-making materials, but also of books and materials about explosive construction. His internet search history painted a picture of someone methodically educating himself about how to build deadly weapons. This wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. It was a carefully planned terrorist attack. As the evidence mounted, investigators were building what they believed was an airtight case. Every element corroborated the others. The digital evidence matched the physical evidence, the timeline was consistent, and Cole's behavior after the attacks, including his apparent attempts to cover his digital tracks, suggested consciousness of guilt. After 4 long years of investigation, the moment finally arrived. Brian Cole Jr. was taken into custody, ending one of the most significant unsolved domestic terrorism cases in recent American history. But the arrest was just the beginning of the final chapter in this story. What happened next was remarkable. Cole spent 4 hours in custody providing information to investigators and, according to multiple law enforcement sources, confessed to planting the bombs. This confession was crucial not just for legal purposes, but for finally providing closure to a case that had haunted federal investigators and raised serious questions about domestic security. Cole's first court appearance was telling. Surrounded by family support, he did not enter a plea, but the evidence presented by prosecutors painted a comprehensive picture of premeditation and capability. The bomb-making materials found in his home matched the components used in the devices placed near the RNC and DNC. His financial records showed the purchase of every component needed to construct the weapons. His digital footprint revealed both the research phase of his plan and his attempts to cover his tracks afterward. But perhaps most significantly, investigators finally had insight into Cole's motivations. He had accepted the false narrative that the 2020 election had been stolen. This belief, fueled by online conspiracy theories and amplified by political rhetoric, had transformed his frustration with the political system into a violent plot against democratic institutions. The targeting of both Republican and Democratic headquarters now made sense. Cole's anger wasn't directed at one party or the other. It was directed at the entire political system. In states like Georgia, he had seen Republican election officials refuse to find additional votes that would have changed the outcome. From his perspective, both parties were complicit in what he believed was a massive fraud against the American people. Prosecutors are seeking pre-trial detention for Cole, arguing that he represents a continuing danger to public safety. The evidence supporting this request is substantial. The sophistication of his devices, the strategic nature of his attack, and his apparent efforts to avoid detection all suggest someone capable of planning and executing complex acts of domestic terrorism. The arrest has also challenged numerous conspiracy theories that had swirled around the case for 4 years. Some had speculated that the bombs were false flags, or that they had been planted by government agents to justify increased security measures. Cole's confession and the mountain of evidence linking him to the devices have put these theories to rest, providing a clear account of what actually happened. The Brian Cole Jr. case represents more than just one man's journey from political frustration to domestic terrorism. It's a case study in how misinformation can radicalize individuals and transform them into threats to public safety and democratic institutions. Cole's path to terrorism began in the digital realm, where false claims about election fraud found fertile ground in his existing political frustrations. Social media algorithms, designed to increase engagement, often amplify content that generates strong emotional responses. For someone already angry about political developments, these algorithms can create echo chambers where false information is constantly reinforced and extreme viewpoints are normalized. The dangerous progression from consumption to action is what makes Cole's case so significant. He didn't just read conspiracy theories, he internalized them, researched how to act on them, and ultimately translated his online rage into real-world violence. His 4-hour confession to investigators provides a window into this process, showing how political misinformation can motivate deadly actions. What makes this particularly chilling is that Cole acted alone. There was no terrorist organization recruiting him, no compound where he was trained, no network of co-conspirators planning coordinated attacks. He was radicalized by content he consumed in his own home, using skills he taught himself through online research, targeting institutions he identified through his own analysis of the political situation. The sophistication of Cole's devices reveals another troubling aspect of modern domestic terrorism: the democratization of destructive knowledge. Information about bomb-making that once required specialized training or criminal connections is now available through internet searches. Combine this accessibility with the amplifying effects of social media algorithms, and the result can be individuals like Cole, capable of constructing weapons that could have killed dozens of people. The timing of Cole's attack, coordinated with the January 6th certification process, shows strategic thinking that goes beyond simple anger. He understood the symbolic significance of his targets and the maximum impact timing of his attack. Had his bombs detonated while the Capitol was under siege, the psychological effect on American democracy would have been profound. Cole's case also highlights the challenges law enforcement faces in the digital age. His repeated phone resets suggest awareness of surveillance techniques and a deliberate effort to avoid detection. Modern domestic terrorists are increasingly sophisticated in their operational security, making them harder to detect and track before they act. The successful resolution of the D.C. pipe bomber case represents a significant victory for federal law enforcement, but it also reveals important lessons about the nature of domestic terrorism in the digital age and the challenges facing investigators who work to prevent such attacks. The 4-year investigation required an unprecedented level of coordination between multiple agencies and investigative techniques. Traditional methods like surveillance footage analysis and witness interviews were combined with cutting-edge digital forensics, financial transaction tracking, and social media monitoring. The case demonstrates how modern law enforcement must be prepared to follow leads across both physical and digital realms, often simultaneously. The role of public cooperation was also crucial. The FBI's decision to offer a substantial reward and actively solicit tips from the community paid dividends, providing corroborating information that helped investigators validate their digital evidence and eliminate false leads. This partnership between law enforcement and the public is increasingly important in an era where potential threats can emerge from anywhere in the community. But perhaps the most significant lesson from the Cole case is about the pathway from political frustration to violent action. His journey wasn't unique. Across the country, federal investigators are tracking individuals who follow similar patterns of online radicalization. The challenge is identifying which individuals will make the leap from consuming extreme content to planning violent acts. The case also reveals the ongoing threat posed by domestic terrorism motivated by political grievances. Unlike international terrorism, which often involves organized groups with clear command structures, domestic political terrorism can emerge from individual radicalization processes that are much harder to detect and prevent. Cole's case shows that a single motivated individual with access to online information can construct sophisticated weapons and plan complex attacks. The evidence recovered from Cole's home and digital devices will likely provide investigators with valuable intelligence about bomb-making techniques, radicalization pathways, and operational security methods used by domestic terrorists. This information can be used to improve detection methods and prevention strategies for future cases. The legal proceedings against Cole will also be closely watched as a test case for how the justice system handles domestic terrorism motivated by political misinformation. His confession provides prosecutors with strong evidence, but the broader questions about how to prevent similar cases remain challenging. As we close this chapter on the D.C. pipe bomber case, it's clear this story is about far more than one man or one failed attack. Brian Cole Jr.'s path from political grievance to attempted violence reveals how misinformation, polarization, and online echo chambers can turn belief into action and nearly alter history. The pipe bombs planted on January 5, 2021 were a chilling near miss. Had they detonated, the events of January 6 could have unfolded very differently. That they didn't is due to sharp investigative work, expert bomb disposal, and a narrow margin of luck, something no democracy can afford to rely on. But here's what still lingers: how close we came, how long it took to uncover the truth, and how many warning signs were hiding in plain sight. What else did investigators uncover that never made headlines? And what does Cole's confession reveal about the next wave of domestic threats? To explore the full investigation, the unanswered questions, and the deeper implications of this case, download the Skoob app now to get access to the complete story, exclusive insights, and more deep dives like this one.